Hey YouTube, my name is Tony Hernandez and today I'm going to talk about what frames per second mean and how can we use them. Alright guys, so I'm going to start by answering what frames per second mean, also abbreviated as FPS. So frames per second refers to the speed at which a still photo, also known as frame, is captured. Then these frames get animated, allowing us to create a moving image. Usually nowadays when you buy a camera, you will find different frame rates like 24 frames per second, 30, 60, and some cameras up to 120 and 240 frames per second. And the reason we use these frame rates is because a long time ago, the film and television industries decided these were the perfect amount of frames per second for a motion picture. And if you want me to make a video talking more in depth about the history of this subject, leave a comment down below. But for now, let's move on how can we use these different frame rates. Alright, so like I said, in your camera you will find 24 frames per second, 30, 60, and in some cameras you will find 120 and 240 frames per second. Let's start with 24 frames per second. This frame rate is the one used to film movies. 24 is the number of frame rates per second your camera records in order to reproduce normal speed motion, and is the one that I'm using right now, is the one that I'm recording myself right now. 30 frames per second is also considered normal speed motion, but this one is mostly used in television, news, and pretty much any live stream. Alright, so let's move on to 60, 120, and 240 frames per second. These frame rates are usually used for creative purposes like slow motions, speed ramps, etc. And when you record in these frame rates, you have to be able to manipulate the footage in your editing software, so you can create the slow motion, speed ramps, or any other effect that you want to create. And the reason you can create a slow motion with these higher frame rates is because they allow you to stretch the footage, giving you the impression of slow movements. And slow motion is very easy to do, guys. If you record at 60 frames per second or higher, after you import your footage to your editing software, just interpret that footage as a lower frame rate. What I mean is this: if you record at 60 frames per second, when you're in your timeline, interpret that footage as 24 frames per second, and that will stretch the footage and give you your slow motion. So in resume, the more frames that you record, the slower things will appear when you stretch the footage in your timeline. And the opposite is also true. The less frames that you record, the faster things will appear. Okay guys, so you might feel tempted to record in a higher frame rate all the time, but you shouldn't. And the best way I can simplify it is like this. If you're planning to record a person talking, like an interview, blogging, or any real-time footage, you should record at 24 or 30 frames per second. And if you're planning to record some b-roll to make slow motion speed ramps, you should record at 60 or higher frame rate. And the reason is because if you record an interview or vlogging at 60 or a higher frame rate, your footage might look a little bit odd. It might look like, I like to call it, hyper. So what I recommend you to do is to plan ahead and have an idea how do you want your video to look like. That way you'll know when to record at 24 frames per second and when to change your settings to 60 or a higher frame rate for your b-roll. Let's not forget, all these frame rates are just tools for us to create amazing content. And I encourage you to experiment with them, because there's no better way to understand something, there's no better way to learn something than practice. Alright YouTube, we have reached the end of this video, and if you want me to show you how I record and edit my slow motion and speed ramps, leave a comment down below. You know what to do: like, comment, subscribe, ring that bell, and see you guys next time. Or not, this is a free world, people.